Hey guys, and today I'm very excited to bring you the first video from my new home. In this video we're going to talk about a kind of fun topic, which is window management in Mac application development. So in a lot of Mac app tutorials they talk about how to implement specific functionality, but not really the big picture of how to manage an overall app, and that's never more the case with window management. Even the default template that Apple gives you doesn't make the best use of window management and a model that will scale throughout the whole use of your application. So today I'm gonna show you the proper way to manage windows in your app, with the understanding that I'm learning as well. So I may later learn some better ways to do some stuff. But if you're up for learning, learn along with me, and let's have a look at how to deal with Windows in your app. So what we're going to do in this video is I've got a simple example of what the basic setup might be that you might see in some other tutorials. We're going to talk about why that's wrong and kind of what you can do about it. So without further ado, let's dive in. I've got an Xcode project open here, and if I look in my main window.exe file, the file that Apple gives us in which to design our user interface, I've just got a button. And if we look in a custom class that I've set up to separate my code, notice I've got an instance of it initialized here, the interface controller class. If I look in interface controller, all it does at the moment is when someone clicks on it, it outputs a message to the console called button clicked. So if we start our application, we get a nice window here with the button that we designed, and if we click that button, sure enough, we get the message button click. So you might be thinking, what's wrong with this? We get a window by default. Why wouldn't we just design it in that window? Well, the problem comes when you have to reference a window, when you need to use the window to launch another window, or when you need to pull down a sheet that attaches to that window, or really just any time where you need to reference the window. So let's look at an example of where that might be a problem. Here in this commented out code, I've got a example where I tried to bring up an alert as a sheet that I want to be attached to my main window. So if we uncomment this code, here I set up my alert button and my alert text, and then here I begin sheet modal for window. Now, what window are we attaching this to? Because it needs one. If we looked in our app delegate class, which is the class that starts off our application, we might think, well, there's a window var there that we can attach to. We can call that variable. Well, if the problem with that is this is our app delegate class, but this is a class itself, whereas that's an instance variable. So how do we access that? Well, we don't control when we initiate an instance of this object. The application controls that. So how can we get access to it? Well, one way, if we're using its default implementation, might be to in this method say nsapp.mainWindow, and it's an optional, so I'm gonna unwrap it here, and if I run that, our sheet is indeed going to be attached to our main window. So now what's wrong with this? Well, if we have several classes in which we want to access this window object in several different situations, because the system controls the NS object, we don't always know when we're going to have access to it, and we don't have control of it. So we want to create our own window controller class that controls our window, and that we have kind of ownership of, for lack of a better term, and can control. So let's take a look at how to do that. Basically, the philosophy is we're going to create this instance of the NS window controller class, and it's gonna own our nib file, our graphical user interface file. We're then gonna create a singleton of that class. Now, what's a singleton? Well, a singleton is a class that can only have a single instance. So the idea is, instead of instantiating an object of the class, we're going to call a method on the class itself, not an instance that's always going to refer to that one window. So in our app, we're always going to know where the main window is. This isn't a good strategy to be using all over your app. You don't want lots and lots of singletons, because that goes against OOP principles. But you want some singletons for important things like the main window that everyone should have access to. So how do we do that? Well, because this main menu.zip file is controlled by NS application, if we look in the files owner, we notice it says NS application. We don't have control of the NS application object, so we don't want to use this main menu file. Now, we need this main menu file because it controls obviously the menu and initializing the application. But what we want to do is take the window itself out and create our own window. So I'm actually going to copy the window object for later use, because you can copy between interface builder files. So I'm going to copy that, but I'm going to remove it out of this window. I'm then going to create a new file, which is going to be the new controller of our new window that we're going to have access to because we created it. And I'm going to say I want to create a Cocoa class, and that class is going to be called main window controller. And it's going to be a subclass of the NS window controller class. And I'm going to create a zip file to go along with it. What's that going to do? Well, it's going to do some important stuff for making our interface file be controlled by that class, and we're going to look at what it does in a minute. So I'm just going to say create a zip file for user interface, and I'm then going to hit next, and I'm just going to create our file in a default location. I don't actually need to do anything to the window, so I'm going to delete this default application lifecycle window did load method, and do what I need to do with this window controller class, which is going to be something very simple. I'm actually going to rename the zip file to be main window instead of main window controller, because this user interface file isn't our controller. That Swift file just above it is what's our controller. So I'm going to rename that file. Okay, so now that we've ripped the guts out of our app delegate, we don't if I run this application, our application runs, as you can see by this menu here, but no window shows up. So how do we make it show up the window that we created? Well, first of all, we're going to modify that window bit. So I'm going to go into my new file, which is just a blank window, and get rid of this window and paste my new window into there. Now we need to be aware of a few things that this has done for us. If I look at the file's owner, the class is main window controller, so when I created a zip file to go along with this, it automatically set my class to be the controller for this object. But there are a few outlets we need to set. So we need to say that the window controller for this, or we need to say that the window for this zip file is this window. So what we need to do is right click on this file's owner placeholder and make a connection between the window outlet and our window. Now, an interesting thing to talk about is how does it know there's a window outlet? We didn't define one. Well, our main window controller inherits from NS window controller, which has a var on it called window, so that's where it gets that from. Now, our window is all hooked up, but if we look at our button, because I copied and pasted this in, if we look at our actions, it no longer knows what to do when we press this button, because our new interface doesn't have an instance of our interface controller initialized. So we're gonna drag on a generic object to make it an instance of that controller. So I'm then going to go into my identity inspector and set that it is an instance of this interface controller. I can then go back into my button and reset the connection between that and the interface controller. So I can say that the sent action is in the interface controller, and it's the button was clicked with send action. So now if I rerun this, I would see my window again, and if I press this button, it would show my window. But the whole point of this was so that we would have access to this window. So what do we need to do now? Well, we need to create something in our window controller where we can always access this window. Now, why can't we just call main window controller dot window? Well, because as we saw before, window is a property on our main window controller. Well, we can, but that would mean we would have to create an instance of this main window controller every time we wanted to use it, and that's not practical. What we need to do is have one instance that we can reference for our app. So how do we do that? Well, we say that there's a static variable, and in this case a static constant on our object called shared, and that's the convention that we use to mean it's a shared instance of this class. In terms of Apple's frameworks, you have ns application.shared, ns notification center dot default, but in this case we say shared, so we say that's going to be equal to an instance of our main window controller class. Now, which initializer do we want? Because there's several. Well, we want the window nibname one and not the window nibname owner, because we don't want to reset the owner, because we went to all that effort to define it in Interface Builder. So we need to give it the name of our nib file that we want to own, or name of the nib file we want to start, and we need to wrap it in this nib.name constructor. I'm going to go into this in a future video, because you used to be able to just pass a string here, and to beginners it probably doesn't make sense. Why couldn't you just pass a string? But this is for a very good reason, and we're going to talk about the proper way to approach this in future videos. But for now, we're just going to pass the name in directly. So we're going to say the nib file we want to open is our main window. So I've now got something that I can call and have access to anywhere in my app. But where does this get initialized? Because everything has to get initialized somewhere. So where am I gonna initialize it, even though it's a global instance? Well, because the app delegate is the first thing that I've got access to that gets initialized, I'm gonna do it in the init method for that. So below this outlet, I'm gonna say that I'm gonna override the init method, and all I'm gonna do is say that on the main window controller, get my shared instance of that class and show the window. Now, I would normally pass self here as the sender very often, so I knew what class this call came from, but I can't pass self in this case because it's still being initialized, so it doesn't know what self is. So I'm just going to pass nil, because I don't really need to know the sender anyway. So I now should have a window that I've got access to that starts when my application starts. But how can I use it? The whole point of creating this shared instance that was shared for all our classes was that I could refer to this from anywhere. So going back to our original example, in our separated off bit that's nicely separated from our app delegate, how do I properly call this window? Well, I just simply do main window controller dot shared, which is my shared or global instance of that window controller, and then the property we saw before that all window controllers have a default property called dot window, which is linked to that window. So that's what we're going to call, and it's an optional, so I'm going to force unwrap it by putting an exclamation mark there, because I pretty much know that's always going to be set. And with any luck, if I run this application, we should see that our window should be launched. And even better, if I click this, because I've still got a reference to that window, we get the sheet attached to that window without having to use our global NSApp main window function that we don't have control over. So that was just a simple explanation of how to use Windows in your app and how to create singletons that are accessible on everywhere in your application. It's not appropriate for all Windows to be singletons, because not all of them we want to have global access anywhere in our application, but something like the main window, it can be really useful, and there aren't really any tutorials explaining this. So that was some simple stuff. Now, one thing that I want to address quickly is, so some of you might be saying, we don't do app development like this anymore. We use storyboards. Well, and it is true that a lot of this is alleviated if you do use storyboards. But I showed you with zip files for two reasons mostly. One, because that's the main way Mac development's been done for years, and two, because I think because you don't get a lot of the kind of sugar that you get with storyboards, it shows you a lot more detail on how things work. So let's go over a little bit about what we've done. We created our window controller class. We then hooked our zip file up to that window controller by setting it as the file's owner, and then attaching its predefined window outlet to our window. That gave us a reference or a pointer to that window. We then, to give us a global instance of that, created a variable in our class itself that was an instance of itself and initialized with that nib file, and we then show that window when the application launches. So I hope this was interesting. Feels like it was a bit rambly, but there aren't really many other videos explaining it and going into that much detail on YouTube. Say a lot of videos go into very cool things that are how to implement specific features, but not really any organizational stuff that you'll see when you start getting into bigger apps. So hope that was helpful. Thanks very much for watching, and well done if you got to this point in the video. Bye bye.